Easy in the Harness: Stories, Solutions, and Strategies for Safe, Satisfying Driving. This podcast is all about working animals in harness, from agriculture to pleasure driving to performance driving at the international level. Learn about what driving is, training tips, history, and more with each episode. I am your host, Corey E.R. Trout of CERT Horsemanship. Today we are going to talk about spares kits. Here is a fun little fact. When I was trying to figure out a name for this podcast, I was actually thinking of calling it the Spares Kit because the Spares Kit is something you should have when you're driving. What is a Spares Kit, you might ask? Well, it is just about as it sounds. It is spare parts that you might need, and what you might need will depend on your individual vehicle and harness, but it's basically the spare stuff that you need in case something breaks. That's it. That's a spares kit. Enough things in there to help you limp home if something happens. So ideally your vehicle has some sort of basket to store your spares kit in, though you can very well just use a belt or something to strap it to the underside of your seat too. It's a good idea to have on hand just in case of anything. I tell my students all the time, it's not what would happen, it's what could happen. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. Luck favors the prepared, to quote Edna Mode from the Incredibles movie. But your standard spares kit that you might buy from a retail store or, carriage driving outfitter will include most of the following: an adjustable reel wrench, a hammer screwdriver combination, lacing, leather lacing, hoof pick, vice grip, pocket knife, leather punch, usually one of those rotary ones that has multiple holes in it, horseshoe nails, a hame strap, rein splice, and a trace splice. It may also include string gloves for when it's raining, a rope halter and lead rope, or even a regular halter, but rope halters are a little lighter weight and easier to shove into a small space. A horseman's knife, which is a pocket knife with a hoof pick, hoof knife, and maybe another couple other things built into it. And things you might also want to have in your spares kit might include zip ties, duct tape, baling twine, the three big, let's piece something together tools of the trade here. You might want spare nuts and bolts, first aid supplies, a whistle, electrical tape, and maybe even a flashlight. So you don't have to have like a full set of wrenches if you only have two sizes of bolts on your vehicle. So just tailor your spares kit to your personal vehicle and your harness. There's no real one size fits all because there are so many different types of vehicles. There are so many different types of harnesses. Just have what you need, basically. So there are things that are classically in there, and I've listed them above, at the beginning. And you have them all put together in a little bundle that can be stored in your cart or carriage so you can have access to it. So the spares kit is basically there to patch up your vehicle or harness just enough so that you can get home or to your trailer, so that, heaven forbid, you have your rain break. You have that little leather punch in there so you can put a hole in each of the broken ends, and then you buckle your rein splice in there and to secure the two pieces together, and that allows you to put your lines back together and make it home. The trace splice is basically the same deal. You have your hole punch big enough, punch holes in your traces, and the trace splice is a double-ended buckle. It's got buckles on both sides, and you buckle into the holes that you make, and away you go. So you may have to cut some of the trace in order to make sure that you end up even, or you just put the hole, you don't put the hole right at the end, you put the hole a little bit in on your trace so that your traces are the same length as you're going home. But again, this is emergency spare stuff. If it's not 100% perfect, unless you're like 10 miles from home, you should be fine. But that's also where your knife comes in handy as well, right? So a lot of our modern harnesses are synthetic, but there's still leather ones out there because some people just prefer that material. However, if yours is synthetic, keep in mind that it can be a little harder to punch or cut through because you've got that outer layer and then you have the inner webbing. So the outer layer is oftentimes fairly easy to punch into, but then you get to the webbing, which is, woven together. It can be a little bit harder to convince your standard leather punch to go through. It can be easier to get something through the synthetic material if you heat up the metal and basically burn the hole through, but that might not be feasible for an away from home situation unless you include a lighter in your spare kit. just be sure that your leather punch or whatever you're using actually works on the type of strapping that you have before you have to use it. So, test this stuff out. Be sure it works. If you don't want a leather punch, you can have an awl with a hammer, and that'll work as well. So your classic spares kit suggests that you have a hammer and horseshoe nails to tack a shoe back on. But if your horse is barefoot and you're using hoof boots, you might want, instead of, a hammer and, well, you may still want a hammer, but instead of having the horseshoe nails in there, you might want to include spare parts for the boots that you're using. Or maybe even just an entirely spare boot to be included just in case you lose it. So that allows you to just, slap on your spare boot, or you can repair the piece that breaks, and away you go. So even if your horse is shod, having a hoof boot, if you lose a shoe, might not be a bad idea, especially if you don't feel comfortable enough to nail the shoe back on. So either way, having a spare boot sized to your horse might be beneficial in your spares kit, whether your horse is shod or not. So some people might recommend keeping a halter and a lead rope. If you're in an arena, it probably doesn't matter too much, but if you're out on the town or on the trail, at minimum, take a lead rope with you. So hopefully you have a gullet strap on your bridle with a ring on it, but if not, maybe have that halter too, so your horse doesn't have to wear the bridle the whole time if you do need to pause for a while. And as I said before, the rope halter is a lot of times a little easier because it takes up less space, less hardware, and it's lighter weight. So other useful things that you might want to include, like latigo string, which would be, leather lacing. You can use it to tie things together. A lot of these things that you have in your spares kit are basically there to get you along well enough so that you can make it home where you can do a real fix. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to have like a completely new set of ball bearings and stuff that you can trade out if something happens to your wheel or what have you, but just enough to limp yourself home so that you can then really fix things. So with your holdback straps, you don't necessarily need a spare one of those. I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt, but if you have a small vehicle, you don't want to necessarily burden yourself with 50 pounds of spare stuff, especially if you have a Mini. But anyways, you don't necessarily need a spare holdback strap because ideally you should have them wrapped at least once fully around your shafts. If your holdback straps aren't long enough to do that, I highly recommend that you get longer ones so that you can at least do a single wrap fully around your shafts. That way, if you do have a failure at your buckle of your strap, you can undo one of the wraps and you still have holes that you can use. So I try very hard to minimize the number of holes that I use on the end of my holdback straps for that very reason. If I lose 2 holes off the end of the strap, that's not so bad, but if I only have 1 hole left and that's it, that could be a problem. Now, if you have buckle failure on your holdback, which is unlikely, but you could use your trace splice if needed to make a connection so you can get your horse and your vehicle back home. So like if the buckle itself breaks, you can punch a hole, buckle the trace splice in there, punch, and then buckle into the hole on your holdback strap. So some horse shows that I've been to driving, some of them have requested having a quarter sheet, especially if it's, the winter, and having that be in with your spares kit. And I've actually used the quarter sheet to wrap my tools in, and because I didn't have a actual, spares kit holder at the time. Another thought is you don't necessarily have to have the adjustable wheel wrench. If you have a wrench that will work with the nuts and bolts on your carriage, you can do just the standard wrench or even a socket wrench in that one size instead of having the adjustable one. If you have multiple nut and bolt sizes, a crescent wrench, which is also adjustable, will work. So you don't have to have, a whole bunch of tools. Now, I do know that with some bolts that go through, if they're not threaded into the vehicle, you may want 2 wrenches just to have, hold the nut steady on one side while you're undoing the bolt on the other. But, individual vehicle, pack what you need. In short, you should have the tools that work for your vehicle in your spares kit. That's the long and the short of it. You should also have the tools to remove your wheel if necessary. Some may require a spanner wrench to remove the hubcap, and again, check out your own vehicle, see what you need. If you have any screws on your vehicle, a screwdriver is also important to have. To save space, there are those little hammers that have multiple screwdrivers that screw into the handle, so you have that hammer screwdriver combination. Most shows aren't going to require you to have a first aid kit, but if you're out on the trails, it doesn't hurt to have one on hand, even if it's just, some gauze and vet wrap to tide you over. So the spares kit is also a reason why it is preferable to have a basket or other sort of containment area that you can put things in on your vehicle. It's very nice to have a place that allows you to hold stuff without it sliding around or falling off your vehicle. And so, yeah, that's the spares kit. What types of things do you keep in your spares kit? If you don't have one yet, start thinking about it. And happy driving. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something new. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at easyintheharness@gmail.com. If you wish to support this podcast and other educational content, please go to our Patreon at patreon.com/certhorsemanship. That's CERT horsemanship. It will also be linked in the show notes. Being a supporting member gives you early access to the podcast episodes and transcripts. Higher levels of support give you access to videos, diagrams, and more that I have to offer, covering subjects from harness fit and function, vehicle selection, maintenance, and training your horse to drive, as well as more. This episode was produced by Amaris Saldate. And remember, you have freedom when you are easy in your harness.